Good morning children. Welcome to St.Xavier School e-classes. I hope you all are fine and enjoying with your family. Today in the first session I am going to take English first chapter, that is 3 questions. So in this chapter a king has 3 questions in his mind, and in this chapter you will find how the king is seeking the answers to these questions. What does he want? Will he be able to get the answers to the questions that have come to his mind? So when we read the chapter, we'll see out what are the 3 questions and how does he seek the answers to these questions. So shall we start? So I'll read the chapter and I'll explain to you how and what the king does in the following.
The thought came to a certain king that he would never fail if he knew 3 things. These 3 things were: what is the right time to begin something? Which people should he listen to? What is the most important thing for him to do? So there was a king, and a king once thought that if he knew 3 things, if he knew answer to these 3 things, he would never fail. So what was these 3 things? These 3 things were: what is the right time to begin something? Which people he should take advice from? And third, what is the most important thing for him to do? The king therefore sent messengers throughout his kingdom, promising a large sum of money to anyone who would answer these 3 questions. So what do you mean by messenger? One who brings messengers. One who bring messages. So the king, what he did, he sent messengers throughout his kingdom, and he also promised to give a reward of a large sum. What do you mean by sum? A large amount of money to the person who answered his 3 questions. Many wise men came to the king, but they all answered his questions differently. So many wise men, they gathered in his kingdom and they tried their luck. They all gave a number of answers. They had different suggestions. They all had different opinions and they placed it before the king. And the last paragraph of page number 7, in reply to the first question, some said the king must prepare a timetable and then follow it strictly. Only in this way, they said, could he do everything at its proper time. So, the first person, what was the first person suggested that the king should go by a timetable. That means he should follow a timetable and follow it strictly. Others said that it was impossible to decide in advance the right time for doing something. So, when others suggested that it's not possible to decide in advance that when is the right time or how we can do it, the king should notice all that was going on, avoid foolish pleasures, and always do whatever seemed necessary at that time. Yet others said that the king needed a council of wise men who would help him act at the proper time. This was because one man would find it impossible to decide correctly without help from others the right time for every action. So the people, they gave them a number of answers. Others said that the king should do whatever he seemed right at that very moment. Yet others also suggested that the king should consult wise men or magicians and they would help him to find a suitable time, what and when to do the correct thing. But then others said that there were some things which could be urgent. These things could not wait for the decision of the council. In order to decide the right time for doing something, it is necessary to look into future. So this one is one they suggested. They advised that like if something goes wrong, if some actions has to be taken in urgently, then they can't wait for the decision of the council. So in order to do the things correctly, they should look for doing something the right time. They should look into the future. And who can do this? The person who look and can predict about the future, and only magicians could do that. The king therefore would have to go to magicians. So they suggested that the king should consult wise men or magicians. In their answers to the second question, some said that the people most necessary to the king were his counselors, others said the priest. A few others chose the doctors, and yet others said that his soldiers were the most necessary. Now they are sorting out to the second question, the answer to the second question. And what was that? Some gave top importance to his counselors, others they gave top importance to priests, and yet others to doctors or to soldiers. To the third question, some said science, others chose fighting, and yet other religious worship. So in reply to the third question, the wise men they suggested that they should give importance to science or fighting or religious worship. What do you mean by religious worship? It means an act of worship. So we continue to the next paragraph. As the answers to his questions were so different, the king was not satisfied and gave no reward. So the king was not at all satisfied. He was not satisfied by the suggestion by the answers that were being given by different people. So what he did, now we'll look into it, what he did after being not satisfied. Instead, he decided to seek the advice of a certain hermit who was widely known for his wisdom. So what do you mean by hermit? Hermit means a saint, or what we can say as sant or sannyasi. The hermit lived in a wood which he never left. So what do you mean by wood? He lived in a small forest. He saw no one but simple people, and so the king put on ordinary clothes. So even the king, he went to meet the hermit, he went to meet the saint by wearing put on his ordinary clothes. Why? Because he saw that over that village, near the woods, that small forest, the people were very simple. So he also put on ordinary clothes and he went to meet the hermit. Before he reached the hermit's hut, the king left his horse with his bodyguard and went on alone. So, as he reached the hermit's hut, what he did, he get down from his horse, he left his horse with his bodyguard and he went to meet alone. As the king came near the hermit's hut, he saw hermit digging the ground in front of his hut. So as soon as the king he came near to the hermit's hut, he saw that the saint was digging the ground in front of his hut. He greeted the king and continued digging. What do you mean by greet? Means welcome. So the saint welcomed the king and continued digging. The hermit was old and weak, and as he worked, he breathed heavily. The king went up to the hermit and said, I have come to you, wise hermit, to ask you to answer 3 questions. How can I learn to do the right thing at the right time? Who are the people I need most? And what affairs are the most important? So these were the king was not satisfied with the answers, with the suggestions the people gave. So what he did, the king went to a saint who lived in the jungle alone, and there he saw the old and weak saint digging the ground. The king asked his question. So the king had different questions. What all three questions arose in his mind, he put forward before the saint to get the answers to those questions. The hermit listened to the king but did not speak. He went on digging. "You are tired," said the king. "Let me take the spade and work in your place." So the hermit, he kept on listening to the king. What all he was asking, he kept on listening, but he did not speak. He did not answer his questions. He got no answer from that question. He continued his work. What he was doing? He was digging. So the king said that you are tired. Now I will help you. I will help to do the work. So he took the spade from the saint's hand and started digging. "Thanks," said the hermit, giving the king his spade. Then he sat down on the ground. So the hermit, the saint, he thanked because he helped him, isn't it? So he said thanks, he appreciated for his help, and he gave the king the spade to do the digging, and the saint, the hermit, he sat down on the ground. So we move on to the next page. When the king had dug 2 beds, he stopped and repeated his questions. So what do you mean by beds? It means small grounds or small patches for plants. Bed means a garden plot, as we have flowers grown over there. So he was digging. So the king had dug 2 beds and he stopped and he repeated his questions. Again, what answers he was seeking for, he placed those questions again in front of the saint. The hermit gave no answer but stood up, stretching out his hand for the spade, and said, "Now you rest and let me work." So the saint, he didn't open his mouth to give any answer to his question, but he stood up and he took the spade. He stretched out his hand for the spade and he said to king, "Now you rest and let me work. Now I'll continue my work." But the king did not give him the spade and continued to dig. But the king, when the saint asked the spade, the king did not give and he continued digging. 1 hour passed, then another. The sun went down behind the trees, and at last the king stuck the spade into the ground and said, "I came to you, wise man, for an answer to my questions. If you can answer me, no answer. Sorry. If you can give me no answer, tell me so, and I will return home." "Here comes someone running," said the hermit. So the king asked his questions, but he got no answer. Then he took the spade from the hermit and he began to work in his place. So several hours passed and it was evening. So what the king did, he stopped digging the beds. The king was ready to take leave from the hermit. So just then the saint told the king that someone was running towards them. So the first part of the chapter is completed. Now in the next session we'll read the second part of this chapter.